Psalm 16. Psalm 16 this morning is it's an interesting one. It starts off, actually, it's called a miktam, which not many people understand exactly what that terminology means, except that it's likely this psalm was kind of a greatest hits. It was one that has very easily remembered phrases that are used elsewhere. And so it's a little bit of a banger, really, Psalm 16. But it's also a little bit of a challenge. And the challenge starts off this way. How do you see God? What do you know him to be? Or how do you imagine that he exists? Is he the judge, the great cosmic judge? Is constantly looking to catch us, doing what we shouldn't be doing, is waiting to bring the hammer down? Is he the cosmic grandfather who just couldn't possibly be upset with you ever about anything because you're just so precious? He loves what you love. He blesses what you bless, right? Or is this God an architect who has long since forgotten about his creation? He put it all in motion. He started it, but you and I are kind of on our own. Well, what the text says this morning is that God defines himself as our portion, as our cup. It's a very intimate description. Our provider, what we need, the path of joy and life. That is a tough claim. And it's really hard, I think, in many ways, for us to believe that without some kind of systematic, rational proof. How do we believe in a God who makes a claim like this? Because here's the thing, as you read this morning, Psalm 16, you and I are in all kinds of different states of disrepair. Some of you feel that things are just broken. You have absolutely no idea how you're going to just make it through one day to the next. You show up on a Sunday morning and you're kind of barely hanging on. Some of you are full of joy. Life is good, but you're also worried about life in the future. How's it going to work out? Some of you are in the middle of massive heartbreak. And it's hard for you to imagine what it would even mean for your needs to be met. For that reason, I think Psalm 16 is a watershed psalm for us. How are we going to believe this? What's God going to show us? I want to read it to you, and you'll see just how maybe improbable these claims may seem, depending on where you are this morning. We're going to invest in this together, see where God goes. Look, Psalm 16, preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. As for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. Their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out, or take their names on my lips. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. I bless the Lord who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. I've set the Lord always before me because he's at my right hand. I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol or to the grave, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So, friends, the portion really works itself out this way. That is a portion for full cups, empty, and broken cups too. The wording here in the beginning, the portion for our full cup, it's really stunning. It talks about chasing something, exhausting oneself. If you look at Psalm 16, the psalm, if you see it here in verse 4, the sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply, their drink offerings of blood, so on and so forth. You may be wondering, what in the world is this about? Well, first of all, it's a description of worship practices in the ancient Near East, which is that often You would have a blood offering that you would pour out for the sake of pleasing that God, right? These practices would often be not just to animals, but to human beings, to children, to the infirm adult. These blood offerings were things that David says are an abomination. So he becomes, essentially what he says is this portion, this full cup, God becomes all that I have. And the imagery of this God who has a drink offering poured out to him, it talks about hastening or running after other gods. And that's really important data for us this morning. Because while you and I read it as run after or hasten, we might miss what's going on here. It's talking about the worship of other gods as whatever it is that we chase after and pay a price for, okay? So the picture is actually one of going and buying or paying a bride price for your bride, paying a dowry. Paying a bride price for your bride, expending this expense, being kind of going into debt for this other person, you are paying for them. And that's what David is saying, the worship of these other gods is like you pay the way, okay? You pay the freight in order to be that God's person, all right? But that's not actually the way that David describes our God. And instead, what we need to recognize is that one of the enemies of seeing God as our portion or our cup or our provision or seeking refuge in him, one of the challenges is that our hearts are often already full. Our hearts are already full. We already have a full cup. If we don't see that, then we're going to read something like this and say, well, that's not me. I just need to worship that God along with the other gods that I worship. But the point that David is making is he's saying that part of your heart that you have already made full with the stuff of life, that's the problem. All right? The full, even good things, right? Your job, you love your job, that's not a bad thing. But when it fills your cup, when it becomes the thing that you trust in, when it becomes your refuge, that's not good. Even good things like your marriage, if you're married. You may have a wonderful marriage. And you may say, we are each other's person, right? You complete me. All of those things you might say. You have a wonderful marriage. If the marriage is your full cup, what David is saying is you and I have a problem. Well, let's not leave it just to David. Let's talk about St. Augustine. 4th century North African theologian, one of the most influential in the Christian tradition. Here's how he talks about his life. I love this. He says, to Carthage I came, where a cauldron of unholy loves bubbled up all around me. I loved not as yet I loved to love. I searched about for something to love. By the way, this is in your worship guide if you're looking for it. In love with loving. For within me I had a dearth or an absence of that inward food, yourself, my God. Though that dearth caused me no hunger, but I remained without all desire for incorruptible food, not because I was already filled, but the more empty I was, the more I loathed it. In other words, as he filled his life with these other loves, he recognized they were empty. And even in their emptiness, he refused to love the one who he needed to love. So the reason why I mention that is because our challenge this morning is not, will God perform? But it's often that we show up in love with other gods, in love with love, right? Now, it's not just Augustine. Let me go to the Bible for a second from Ecclesiastes. Now, when I grew up as a Christian, I became a Christian in middle school, high school, the one book that I was told you should never read was Ecclesiastes, right? The reason they said that is because they said, if you read Ecclesiastes, it will depress you. That was what I was told. Don't read it, it's depressing. Now, I can tell you it's one of my favorite books of the Bible. Now, you may take that, it's because I have this melancholic nature, but that's not it. It's because it talks about all of life in a very real way. The Bible is unflinching in telling us the truth. Solomon, here's what he writes. It sounds like Augustine when you read it. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. That's a pretty big statement in itself. Also, my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. By the way, what a statement. He is living his best life, right? My heart found joy in all my toil. Some of you are like, give me some of that, you know? Here's what he says. This was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and all the toil I had expended in it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind. There was nothing to be gained under the sun. In other words, there was a vapor. Wasn't anything there. You can't grab hold of Christ without the acknowledgement that all of life, if you try to make it your portion or your cup, is empty. That's where we have to begin. That's the great challenge. It's good to be reminded that we're not easy. You and I are not easy refugees, right? We may say, I want to take refuge in you, God, but to be honest, we've already taken refuge in a lot of things, right? We do. We take refuge in the fact that we're good people, we're nice people, we help people. We give of our time, our treasure, our talents, or we're approved of by mom and dad. Our neighbors love us, we have a good reputation, we're physically attractive. Whatever it is. Before we can see what God has for us in this text, from the very beginning we have to say, to take refuge in God is to take refuge in God first and most, before everything else. That's a hard thing. As human beings, we have a full cup by nature. We fill ourselves with other things, other loves, other gods. But it's not just a portion for those of us with full cups. In other words, what David is offering to us, he's talking to us about this God. This God is not just for those of us who think we've got all that we need. It's also for the ones of us who think that we have nothing. In other words, who know that we're in need. I want you to see it. The portion for the empty cup, verses 5 through 10. The Lord's my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. Now, this language of the lines and the inheritance may sound strange, but if you understand the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes had their different portions, and they were marked out. These were their inheritances. But then there was a group, the priests, the Levites, who actually didn't have any land portioned out for them. Instead, what David is talking about, what he's learning, is he's saying, God is my land. He's my inheritance. Now, do you realize how hard it is to say this? I'm really pushing us into this place where we really have to have one of two reactions. Either we say, what David's talking about is this heavenly escapism where he's all we need. Okay, that's crazy. I need lots of things. I need a job that pays the bills. I need, family. I need, a house and all these other things. Either this is heavenly escapism, or we're supposed to say, yeah, that's religious stuff, but real life is lived on earth, earthbound realism. It seems like those are only two options. Heavenly escapism, earthbound realism. But what we see here is something else. As a matter of fact, this text about the portion and the incorruptible one, right? As you see in verse 10, you will not abandon my soul to Sheol or let your Holy One see corruption. So David seems to be making a course correction in his explanation here. He's saying, look, now let me talk about this. He says, here's how God is my portion. God is the one who has gone into the grave and was not corrupted. David looks forward to the Messiah, and he says that one is not going to corrupt, it's not going to degrade in the grave like you and I. And that means something. That means something to him. In Acts 2, if you know the story of the New Testament, God's people all gather together. Jesus has been crucified, buried, resurrected. He's ascended into heaven, and then the church is born. Tongues of fire descend. And Peter gives a sermon. Now, this is the same Peter, right, who denies Jesus 3 times? Peter gives this sermon where he talks about this psalm. Thousands of people become believers. He talks about this psalm, and he says, this one who went to the grave so that you and I could be forgiven, You're the ones who crucified him, meaning humanity, we are the ones who crucified this Christ, and yet he has poured out, Peter says, his Holy Spirit on all flesh. And one of the last things he says, the promise is for you. So he says this portion still exists because Jesus has died and has been resurrected and he's moved beyond. So the one who is incorruptible now reigns at the right hand of God, and you and I get to inherit the great inheritance. Then in Acts 13, now it's the Apostle Paul's turn. Now if you know Paul, who was Saul, who is murdering Christians, and then Jesus meets him on the Damascus road and knocks him off his donkey, then he becomes a Christian. Paul is preaching in a synagogue, and he goes back to Psalm 16. He goes to Psalm 16 and he says, remember that psalm about the Holy One not being decayed. Now, why does this matter? That there is a God who his body did not corrupt like ours. Why does it matter? It matters because that is the point of fear for you and me, where all the things we believe the rubber meets the road. You and I can heap up all kinds of things in our life. We can aim at some kind of beautiful future, but you know what? If Jesus doesn't come back first, each and every one of you is going to die. And I'm going to be at your funeral. Just kidding. Each and every one of you is going to die. Me too. And when you think about it this way, when you recognize, this is the reason why the Psalms say, number your days. When you think about it, you start thinking about who's going to take care of everything that I've invested in this life. Can I really trust this God to pour out my life and go into the grave and know that there's something else beyond it? When Paul and Peter look at Psalm 16, they're saying, something has happened that allows you to hope beyond the grave. The law and the Davidic kingdom were dead ends, but here's something else. Jesus raised up, goes beyond the grave. So what does that mean? It means that there's a new kind of hope, that when Jesus goes to the grave, and as David says, he gets to be the right hand of the Father, and David gets to stand at God's right hand. It means that this one who has died and who is raised up not only is incorruptible, but he also has power. He's in control. He's in charge. So David, who knew he was going to die, is looking to the future and to the one who will not die and says, because that one's in control, because he's in charge, I have hope. And he says that to us too. That one that I'm looking toward is in control and in charge. And in fact, what he's done is, because of the way that he dies and resurrects, he takes the heavenly world and brings it into the present. In other words, we're not talking about heavenly escapism. We're not talking about earthbound realism. We're talking about heavenly realism. Because Jesus has gone into the heavens, everything that we could have hoped for from the right hand of God is now coming into the world as we know it. He could have said the Messiah was A, the Messiah was B, but he said the Messiah never dies and the Messiah is the right hand. And so I can trust him. Now, the Apostle Paul makes connections for us this morning. And I want you to understand what's going on here. You and I, the challenge we have in believing that God is our portion is that we feel like all we have is just some promise. Pie in the sky hope. But what the Bible understands is that because Jesus does not die and corrupt like every other body, you and I can hope in a future. In other words, we can look beyond the grave, see the heavenly reality, and that truth then changes our earthbound lives. That reality in the heavens changes our earthbound lives. Let me show you from two passages in Scripture, Ephesians and Colossians. In him, This is from Ephesians. We have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of our trespasses according to the riches of his grace. Okay, I understand that so far. I have redemption through him, which he lavished upon us in all wisdom and insight, making known to us the mystery of his will, according to his purpose, which he set forth in Christ as a plan for the fullness of time to unite all things in him, things in heaven and things in earth, to unite all things. To help us to see that heavenly reality bleeding into the present, to tell us we could hope beyond this life. Then you have Colossians, which makes this statement even more powerfully. In him, we have obtained an inheritance. Sorry, I'm going to go forward here. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. Okay, now you get in the picture. God is big, he's powerful, all things are created through him and for him. Then you get to the really good stuff. He's before all things. In him, all things hold together. Wow, even that's an amazing statement. All things. This life I live, everything I'm going, all of it holds together in him. He's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent or in first place. Now look at this. For in him, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Through him, to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Reconcile all things. The heavenly hope and your earth-born reality of every day brought together. You can trust this God. What he has done is he has made it possible for you and I to say, yes, I can trust Jesus. Heaven has invaded the present. He's the incorruptible one. So Jesus meets our empty cup with his fullness. That's the lesson here. Heavenly fullness in earthly hunger. He meets us. This is incredible. So the theological point is that heaven and earth have been brought together. But the question is, why is God doing this? And the answer is not just that full cups might see that they need Jesus, and empty cups might have some hope of their fullness, but also there are broken cups, right? Not just the full and not just the empty, but the broken cups. And those are the ones, friends, this morning in particular that I have a deep heart for. We live in an anxious generation of people who feel it's not possible, that there's any fullness from beyond that can heal. We have an anxious generation that's hooked on dopamine, on things being interesting, on flipping from one thing to the next, just trying to find something to anchor their hearts and their attention. That's a broken cup. Can't be filled, it seems like. You've heard me say it before, and the church exists. Here's the thing, the church exists so that people might know that if you want to follow Jesus, you're in the right place. The church ministers that message to broken cups, which is all of us at least some of the time. You must want to follow Jesus. Not you want to follow Jesus, not you're good at following Jesus, but you want to follow Jesus. You know you should. And you need Jesus to meet you. How does the church do this? We start to minister the truth of this God who exists beyond, who's risen, so that our current, present, earthly realities can be changed. We start to minister that message, and there are lots of ways that we do that. I want to talk about one this morning as a little bit of a challenge and an encouragement to you as a church, okay? And to me as a pastor. A friend of mine told me, they shared this stat with me, that something like 90% of parents with special need children do not go to church. Nationwide. Now, on Long Island, it's like, that's everybody, right? But nationwide, it's 90%. Why? It's not because somehow they're less believing than other people. It's because churches often are not set up for people who need extra help with their kids, to have a place for them to worship. It's because they've had experiences in churches where they felt they couldn't bring their kids, they were too disruptive, or whatever else. It means there's a huge mission field of people who believe, who are, frankly, who are broken cups, who look and say, I can't find a place to worship where my kid can learn to worship and be welcomed and loved. And I mention that because this church has historically been a church with a special needs ministry. And not just because we have kids who have special needs, but because we're in a community of families with kids, special needs, and in your neighborhoods too. And it's a really great, as a matter of fact, it's hard for me to imagine a more perfect picture of Jesus being our portion than a church that says, those of you who experience this great need can come and experience Christ's fullness in the church. For you, for your family. So I want to challenge us this way. We are, as we move to this one service thing, we have worship service, we have Sunday school. I want us to set up a rotation of helpers who will come alongside our children and teens with special needs. I want them to be able to be present during children's worship and also during the Christian Ed Hour. But we're hoping for a rotation of about 8 people. 8 people who would say, I'll be a part of a group that occasionally is helping to do this work. So that people who show up to church can have their kids participating in worship, can have an opportunity themselves to be present. Now, you may be wondering if you're that kind of person, so I want to describe that person for a second. Okay, and I just want to challenge you to pray about this. If you're the kind of person who can be flexible, who knows how to take concepts and maybe break them up into smaller pieces for kids. If you're willing and able to embrace, to love children and to encourage them in worship. If people have told you, look, you're a really kind or welcoming or loving person, I want you to consider whether or not the Lord has been raising you up for this ministry. And if you feel he has, if you think he might be great for you to reach out and talk to one of us. You can reach out, especially Pastor Martin, be interested in hearing from you. So would I, so would our staff. And here's the thing. If you say, well, I'm definitely not that person, okay? I'm going to ask you to pray. Not just that you might be that person, but that God would raise those people up. So you're not off the hook. I want you to pray that God develops that ministry in our church, not only because we need it, but because it's a great chance to minister the God who is our portion to the community around us. Now, how do we understand it this morning? This portion, this cup, especially if we're in a season of struggle. So I want to speak to you this morning, those of you who read this text and you say, boy, the lines have not fallen in pleasant places. That's not me. I haven't seen it. I'm hurting. I've lost a lot. The lines are not pleasant. I want to speak to you this morning and say this. There is a rational basis for you to see Jesus as your portion. The one who defeats death, who is incorruptible, who moves on into life, who is reigning at the right hand of God the Father. Think about it rationally. If that person truly did die and was raised, then everything he says about you and about his care for you can be believed. If you believe he rose from the dead, then his words rose from the dead too. If you believe that his body was incorruptible, then his promise to you is incorruptible too. And if you are this morning in a place where you say, I can't even see the light, I believe it's true, but I can't see it, I want to encourage you to lean on Jesus today. He is not looking for you to have perfect faith. You got to want to follow him. Look to him this morning in that hope. Know that he has given you a reason to believe. And this is really the last thing I want to say and I want to camp out on. Jesus gives us one prayer in the Bible. Who knows what that one prayer is? Who can say the beginning of that one prayer? Our Father who art in heaven, right? He gives us one prayer. That one prayer is really important because in it, Jesus says, you who need to know where things are going and whether or not there's some hope, let me tell you that when you pray, pray this. Pray the reconciliation of heaven and earth. What does he say? On earth as it is in heaven. He connects those two things. I was at the beach the other day, and it really matters who's on the other line of whatever call and where they're calling from. When Jesus says, pray this prayer, he's telling you who's on the other line. I was at the beach the other day, and there's a guy who stood up, and he answered his phone on the beach. And there's stuff going on. Kids are yelling, screaming. The waves are crashing. Lifeguards are tweeting. Everybody's making noise. Seagulls, their rat faces, making all the noise, right? It's just really annoying. This guy answers the phone, and you hear him say, Steve, hey, Steve, hang on. Steve, stop. I'm in a meeting, Steve. I'm in a meeting. And then he hangs up the phone, right? Part of me just wanted to run up and give him a high five. Like, that takes a lot of boldness. There's no way that guy did not know that he was at the beach, right? But that's what he was saying. This is where I am. I'm telling you right now, you can trust me. I'm in a meeting. Get off the phone, okay? Now, some of us believe that the Lord's Prayer is a God who is on the other side of the call saying, come on, not that again. Don't you get it? I'm in a meeting with much more important people who are asking much more important things. What I want to tell you is that because Jesus is the incorruptible one and he has gone beyond the grave into the heavenly places, you know where he's calling from. And when he calls you, when he tells you to pray, he is saying you must see as a way of life, as a way of life, that I am bringing heaven to earth. And that concern, that doubt, that pain is in some way lessened. Not because everything's changed immediately, but because you know where the change is coming from. And you know that you can trust it. And you know that you can trust him. So as an application, I want to encourage you to let the Lord's Prayer be a way of shaping your life, okay? Let it be guardrail, right? Let it be a guardrail. Let it be a way of announcing your care for the world, right? As you pray the Lord's Prayer, it's actually extraordinarily helpful for you to place all of life in that context. I'm not falling apart. I may be falling apart, but I'm not lost and I'm not hopeless because, oh Lord, you are the hallowed one who is bringing heaven to earth. That's what's true in my life today. That's what's true in my life right now. And we actually practice that when we go to the Lord's table. Why does Jesus give us just this one prayer? He gives us this one prayer because it's the thing we need to know most. Heaven and earth are coming together. And as a matter of fact, every time you come to the Lord's Prayer, if you grew up in a tradition where they're like, yeah, this is just a memorial, then you might not get this. But when we come to the table of the Lord, you are gathered up by the power of the Holy Spirit to be in the presence of God himself, where he unites heaven and earth in this moment. And you and I who think there's no way God could be my portion or my cup, you receive from him, friends. You receive from God. So in a moment after I pray, and we introduce the Lord's Supper, once we've distributed all the elements and we're ready to take them, this morning we're going to pray the Lord's Prayer together before we do. And the reason we're going to do that is because the prayer is answered in part at the table. You pray, oh Lord, may earth be like heaven. May you bring those things together. I so need you to be my cup. And the Lord has in part answered by giving you his body and his blood at the table, his real spiritual presence. His words are a prayer for you, friends. Broken cups, full cups, empty cups, that he might be your portion.